All right, so the first part is going to be somewhat of a review with some new mixed in there. Ezekiel 38 and 39. I know I sent out questions for 32 and 33, and Lord willing, we'll get there. But I wanted to cover from 38 and 39 something. This is review. Israel's divinely protected future. In 38 and 39, it's the story, the prophecy of Gog and Magog. So God introduces Gog. It's a multitude from among the nations, a great army. They come swiftly. But it says God is against them. So we know from the beginning that this is about them and more. And God is going to turn them. So God's the one calling them to whatever they're going to be called to. So He's in control. It's a setup. We know that. In 38, 7 through 17, God calls God to come against His unprotected people. For example, in verse 11, it says they come against an unwalled village that rests and lives securely. So here comes this mob coming against this little tiny village, unsecured. Who's going to win? But the great army is, right? Except for something strange happens, and God Himself destroys Gog. And He just totally decimates Gog. There's nothing left of Gog except for bones that the birds are picking on for food. You will fall on the mountains. Now, the situation had been, He had just said in chapter 37, look, you're going to live on the land forever. So you're in Babylon right now, but I'm going to bring you back to the land. You're going to live there forever. Well, they're in Babylon when they receive that, and they say, wait a minute, we've heard this, we're going to be in the land forever stuff before. What's to say this, we're not taken out of it again? So God paints this huge picture of this Gog coming down, and it looks like they're going to lose, and wham, God wins. So we see one point of it was that under the Messianic king, God's people will never be beaten. Another point of it was, remember, God is against Gog. God is going to bring Gog, and then God is going to beat up Gog. And He says multiple times that the nations will know me when I am sanctified through you. That the nations, I'm doing this so that the nations will know about me when I'm done with you. Point 2 of the picture, under the Messianic king, God will be glorified through an evil enemy. Okay, now we take out our lovely, lovely piece of paper that I handed out to y'all. It says a specific look at the day of the Lord. Quotes, the day of the Lord. In our Old Testament and New Testament, we read the day of the Lord some 21 times in the New American Standard Bible. Okay, so look, point number 1, it says passages. And I write only DOL, only the day of the Lord. This is for me, actually. It's not for anybody else, but you've got it now in your hands. So these passages, A through N, actually through M, are only day of the Lord. They include the quotation, the day of the Lord. There are texts in the Old Testament that talk about the last days. I'm not including that in this list. The day of the Lord's wrath. I'm not including that in this list. The day. I'm not including that. This is only the day of the Lord. And I only do that, I do it for several reasons, but we're going to take that as a picture of some bigger things. Okay. Under the passages, A, the expression day of the Lord is used in Isaiah 13, 6, and 9. It is used about Babylon when they are attacked by the Medes. Now, some of this you're going to have to take my word for, okay? You go home, you study this. But right now, all I'm doing is throwing a whole bunch of information at you. And what I want you to do is accept that I'm telling the truth. If you find a problem with it, you come tell me. Ezekiel 13:5 is about the prophets of Israel being condemned by Nebuchadnezzar. Ezekiel 33 is about Egypt being attacked by Nebuchadnezzar. But this word, the day of the Lord, is included in that. In Joel, chapter 1 is about a locust invasion, about a judgment on Israel by locusts. Chapter 2 is about Judah being destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and it uses this term, the day of the Lord. Chapter 2, the end of chapter 2 in verse 31 and 3 and 14, Peter quotes in Acts chapter 2 and says, this is before the day of the Lord. So we know that Joel talks some about what happened in Jerusalem or Judah through a locust invasion. Joel also talks about what happened with Nebuchadnezzar. And then Joel also talks, he's the first one to do this so far on our list, he talks about something coming in the New Testament. Amos uses this expression twice. It's about Israel when they're attacked by Assyria. Because this is the northern kingdom. Obadiah uses it, referring to when Edom is attacked by Babylon. Zephaniah uses it of Judah and of the nations when Nebuchadnezzar comes through in 582 and destroys the rest of Judah and the nations. Malachi uses the great and terrible day of the Lord. I'm at H now. This is after the return, speaking of the future. So now what we're going to talk about is all future, or future to the Old Testament is what I mean. In Acts chapter 2, Peter quotes from Joel and says, this is the day of the Lord. 1 Corinthians 5:5 talks about a yet future day of the Lord. 1 Corinthians 5:5, the man who has his father's wife, the church is to deliver him to Satan so that he may be saved in the day of the Lord. So now we're talking about a yet future, from our point even, day of the Lord. And there are others. 1 Thessalonians 5:2 talks about the same thing. 2 Thessalonians 2:2. 2 Peter 3:10. All right. So there's a list. And I want you to do your best to hang on mentally to me for a few minutes, okay? These are passages with the days of the Lord, the day of the Lord. Now, there are similarities in all of these passages. Big point number 2. There are similarities in all these passages. Not every point is brought out in every passage, but they're scattered throughout. You see that most of them have, first of all, the day of the Lord is near. It's global. If you read the text, all the nations. There's an assembled antagonist. I'm going to bring against you a great army, God is always saying. D, there's always clouds. There's not always, I'm saying always, there's often clouds, darkness, that kind of language. Point E, the location where they are is destroyed. It's desolate. They are left without enemy. Afterward, Israel, you're not going to have an enemy anywhere. G, Israel is gathered in those days. Israel will possess the land. Mount Zion will be populated. Israel's people, sinners will be removed from it. No more strangers. They're going to be purified. They're going to be humble. They're going to be righteous. They're going to be unafraid. They're going to be protected. They're going to love God and His law. The kingdom will be given, or the kingdom of God will be established. That kind of language is used. General blessings will be promised in that time. And the Spirit is also promised in that time. The Spirit will come in that time. Okay. So in big point number 1, we have the passages that talk about the day of the Lord. In big point number 2, we have all these similarities. Every one of these you open up to, you come across basically the same idea. There's this huge event. Enemies are assembled. The enemies who are assembled execute judgment. And Israel's going to live wonderfully, happily ever after. Now, how do dispensational premillennialists interpret all of these passages? Yet future. Now, they might admit, there is some kind of immediate application here to back then, but because it didn't happen, and look at all these similarities, it's all has some kind of fulfillment, yet future. Okay. That's got to do with part 2, all the similarities. And if you open up a book, one of their books, and you go through Isaiah 13, they're going to say, yeah, that had to do with Babylon. And guess what? It also awaits further fulfillment. Ezekiel 13, same thing. You go right down the list and they're going to do it. Almost every single time they're going to say, yeah, it had some kind of application there, but it's yet future. All right. Now, all this in the context of Gog and Magog. What do they think Gog and Magog is? What do they call it? The apocalypse? Or the Armageddon? The apocalypse. Right? That's what they say, no, this is talking about this is talking about Armageddon every single time, especially Gog and Magog. All right. Now, we're going to come back to where we were last week. We already did this last week. When does this happen? Well, if you read in the text, it says, well, when David, my servant, will be their prince forever. What is that talking about? That's talking about the reign of Jesus Christ, right? Jesus receives all the sure promises that were made to David. That's Acts 13, verse 23. And then in chapter 39, it says in verse 29, I will not hide my face from them any longer, for I will have, past tense, poured out my Spirit on the house of Israel. So this is talking about, look, when the Spirit has already been poured out, that's what I'm talking about. During the days of the Messiah, when the Spirit has already been poured out, that is this whole picture I'm painting here, where the Messianic King will never be beaten. Where I'm glorified, this takes place under the Messianic King, right? So, we flipped very quickly. Oh, that's why. So we use this. This is my lovely chart where it says, or my wonderful chart, I like that word, where Ezekiel's right here, and he's really talking about over here. That's what he's really talking about. But they can only see here this wall, because that's all they really know. Because God is talking to them in language that they would understand. Which, by the way, is not only what I say. Where's my piece of paper? It is also what dispensational premillennialists such as Schofield say. For example, in our text of Ezekiel, actually Ezekiel 34, no, Ezekiel 34, Schofield will say he is using the terms which the Jews were familiar with in Ezekiel's day. Now, Schofield is number one, dispensational premillennialist, but my point is he gets what they're doing. God is using the terms that they understand to talk about something greater. Now, Schofield will say that greater thing is something radically different than what we say it is, but he understands sometimes God uses this methodology. The ESV Study Bible will say, and they're not dispensational premillennialists, but they believe in some kind of a literal fulfillment, this vision describes future realities that cannot be fully expressed in terms of Ezekiel's present realities. God is trying to tell them something, but he can't talk to them in words that they'll understand if he is to talk about what it is. So he talks about them to them in words that they do understand, right? Okay. Now, we're still continuing. We said, see Matthew 16:18. The gates of hell will not prevail against what? The church. And we say, yeah, right. Under the Messianic reign, which we're under, this church, don't leave the church. Don't think about getting out of the church. Because if you do, that's where you die. And God says, you want to be protected, you've got to stay in the church. Because the gates of hell will never prevail against the church. Romans 8, right? Romans 8 is, look, neither height nor depth. No, that's not the same one. Oh, maybe it is. Maybe it's included in it. But you know the text. Romans 8. I'm convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any created thing will be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Jesus Christ our Lord. You can't be beaten as long as you're in the Lord. Okay. Now, can you think of another text besides Matthew 16 and Romans 8 in the New Testament that says, look, if you're with me, I win. You'll win. God says, stay with me. Because if you stay with me, I win. Here's a big picture for you of me winning. All of Revelation. Okay. So, I hope that you've been somewhat hanging on mentally with me so far, because we're about to increase it a notch. Okay?
Can I ask a question?
No!
Do you yield for a question?
Yeah, I yield. I yield. The time is mine.
Because my question goes back to your point one before you got to the A's and B's.
What? Okay.
You say only days of the Lord, not last days, last times, days of the Lord, lowercase. You don't say the word lowercase, but you seem to be differentiating from capital D, day of the Lord, and the day of the Lords. Correct?
I wouldn't make too much out of my capitalization there. I'm not making a big difference there.
Okay. So because
Keep going with your thought.
My question is this a specific word only, single word, or phrase?
Phrase.
It is a phrase.
Yes,
Okay.
day of the Lord, not day of the Lord's apostrophe wrath.
Understood. Okay.
No, just day of the Lord.
Okay.
And when you do a word search of day of the Lord, not day of the Lord's, day of the Lord, that's what we're talking about here.
So now you explain that. Can you start over?
Okay. All right. So what I'm about to say is, yes, we understand that Ezekiel is talking about Matthew 16 and Romans chapter 8. And I'm telling you here that Ezekiel, what we're talking about right now, this Gog and Magog thing, is also talking about, if not specifically talking about, Revelation. Okay? Now, there's another prophecy of this event. Ezekiel says, guess what? In the future, there's going to be this big war. But I'm going to win, God says, and you'll be protected forever. Well, Ezekiel's not the only person to say that in the Old Testament. Daniel says it also. And in fact, Daniel gives us time markers, right? So if you turn to Daniel 7. Now, a few years ago, I taught on this, either in class or in a sermon, or both, probably. And then a few years later, I taught on this again. And Jonathan said to me, I knew where you were going to go before you went there, because I had done it in the past. So you may be sick of this, but the end result, I hope, is you'll be able to tell me where I'm going before we get there, because you'll have it in your mind. That way, when the dispensational premillennialist walks in, you'll at least have something to grasp onto. So there's this Daniel 7. All right, remember, it's the four beasts that come up out of the sea. The lion in verse 4. The bear in verse 5. The leopard in verse 6. And then there's the fourth beast. It's not really described, other than it's got a bunch of horns. And then there's the scene where the Ancient of Days takes his seat, and that one that was screaming the boastful words is judged. And then in verse 13, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, a kingdom, and all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is everlasting dominion, which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. And then Daniel asked for the interpretation, specifically of the little horns. And verse 24, verse 23, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom, which will be different from all the other kingdoms. Now, you've read Daniel 2, and you know that Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 line up right hand in hand. We know from history who these beasts are and who these kingdoms are. Verse 24, as for the 10 horns, out of this 10 kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High, and wear down the saints of the highest one. Oh, in the days of those kingdoms, the saints are going to be persecuted. I wonder when that kingdom begins. Jesus Christ will quote verse 13, and it's the last thing we have recorded that he says before they say, he is guilty, kill him. Matthew 26. So Matthew 26, they're trying to get him to confess something, and he says in verse 64, you have said it yourself, I am the Son of God, and I tell you, and now he quotes Daniel 13, and he says, hereafter, or from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds of heaven. And that's where they say, blasphemy! He quoted Daniel 3, or Daniel 7, and Jesus says, when does this happen? From now on. Now, you will also recognize in Revelation 13 and 17. Bear with me, and I'm almost done with this spewing of words in just a second. In Revelation 13, we have those 4 beasts that Daniel 7 spoke of, but in opposite order. So Daniel looks to the future. John, writing Revelation, looks to the backwards and says, there's that first kingdom, the second kingdom, and he ends up in the 4th kingdom. Verse 2, the beast which had come out of the sea, remember that's like Daniel 7, Daniel 13:2. The beast which I saw was like a leopard. There's your first animal. His his feet were like a bear. There's your second animal. And his mouth was like a lion. And the dragon gave him power. So now we're talking about this beast, okay? Daniel 17 talks about the horns. Daniel 17:9. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other one has not yet come. When he comes, he must remain a little while. And the beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7. Verse 12, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, so on and so forth. So we see the same language. And then, I'm almost done, in chapter 19, there's a giant battle. And the Lord says in verse 17, he cried out, all the birds which fly in mid-heaven, which is what God said in Ezekiel 39, come, assemble for the great supper of God, that you may eat the flesh of the kings, and the flesh of the commanders, and the flesh of the mighty, and the flesh of the horse, and those who sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and slaves, and small and great. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse. Oh dear, who's going to win? All these armies against one. And verse 20, the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, and they're thrown in the fire. Which is, again, like Ezekiel. There's this big battle. It looks like the outcome looks obvious. The one by himself is going to lose, but instead, right? Chapter 20, now we actually have Gog and Magog. Verse 7. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore. And they came up in the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints, the beloved city, and they're going to lose. And what happens? Fire comes down, and the saints are protected. All right. Now, I understand that point 1, under the Messianic king, God's people will never be beaten, is generally true all the time. However, I believe that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is really specifically also talking about Revelation. Because Daniel 7, the illusions are just too... Ezekiel says this is going to happen under the reign of Messianic. Jesus says it's happening from now on. Revelation makes all these same illusions as Ezekiel and also Daniel 7. All right. My point in this, all this to make this point, kind of, and that is this. There's a lot of similar language. We've already read some of the similar language. We're going to read more of the similar language. Not all of those prophecies refer to the New Testament. Not all of them do. For example, when God says the kingdom will be the Lord's in the day of the Lord, when it refers to Edom, that happened when Babylon destroyed Edom. Okay? So not all of them refer to the New Testament. Some have referred to the New Testament. More will refer to the New Testament. We are now entering a period where more and more of these prophecies will be talking about events in the New Testament, either back 2,000 years ago or even continuing. Some still refer, some of the prophecies we will read also or only refer to the destruction of the nation of Israel. Daniel 9. Okay? So, this is going to continue. And it's actually going to get worse. Okay? And so while we're reading, we have to navigate. Where are we? What are we doing? What's going on here? And we might make a mistake, but the general idea is we got to be careful while we're going through here. There are some principles that we can apply. So, again, I'm sorry that if this, you're like, why are we doing this again? But again, the point is I hope to make us all, I tell you what, I'm more equipped again because I've reviewed it again, right? Okay. Anybody got a question or a comment on what we've been talking about here? Yes, Jonathan.
Given the story of the world and everything since creation is God makes people serve him, people don't serve him, God punishes people, God saves the people, they turn to him, and that over and over and over again, it's God saving humanity, God saving humanity, and at the end God is going to save humanity and the world is going to be done. It should be be no surprise that there's language of God saving humanity used over and over and over and over again. And there's specific terms like the beast and the lion and that kind of stuff that are, might be extremely parallel between different places. But when someone takes, this is definitely talking about our future, and this is definitely talking about, just because God's talking about saving humanity again, doesn't mean you can apply it to every time that God might possibly save humanity.
Right.
He can say the same thing more than once. Talking about when I was my venomously anti-Christian history teacher that I had in New York City, I teased that he was going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Sermon on the Mount never happened. And the proof was that some of the things that Jesus said at one place, in other Gospels, he said in a different circumstance.
Oh.
Imagine that. A teacher says the same thing
somewhere else.
Multiple times. Why would that surprise us at all?
Right.
The things that God talks about, because the things we always need to hear, because we're always getting ourselves in a situation that we can be saved.
Yeah.
So then, I'm going to save you. Oh, he said it again.
I wonder if that professor ever said that before somewhere else.
Yeah. Probably every year.
Right, every year, and maybe he did it at homes, and just find anywhere else too at the same time. Yeah, that's the point. But we have to be careful because Ezekiel 37 and 38 or 38 and 39 most definitely seem to be referring to, especially when you couple it with Daniel 7 and others, it's referring to Revelation. So it is using the same language about the same thing. But as you say, very well put, it works. It makes the point. So he uses it over and over for other places. Not talking places that are exclusive, events that are exclusive, completely exclusive to anything else. Completely. You know what I mean. Okay. That was a lot of work. All this to say, guys, that when we're going forward, it's going to get a little bit more, not confusing, but we have to pay attention to detail, right? Okay. Ezekiel 32. And Ezekiel 33 through verse 20. Did anybody bring their questions? We have a few people. No? Okay. All right, we're going to skip the questions. Marcy, do you want to answer all of them? You can. Okay. Others did them just... that's what happens sometimes. All right, so question 1. I'll ask the questions myself. So question 1 was, when, what, and against whom? And so in verse 32, chapter 32, verse 1, in the 12th year, in the 12th month, in the first of the month, which is chronologically 2 months after chapter 33, verse 21. So we've only gone 2 months. We've gone a whole 2 months now, guys. But you'll notice that chapter 32 comes before chapter 33. So chronologically, chapter 32 comes after chapter 33. But because chapter 32 is still talking about the foes of Egypt, topically it comes before chapter 33. Okay, so there you go. Question number 2 was, what did God say Egypt was like? So here we go. The introduction is approximately 585 BC, somewhere right around there. Then there's the accusation. Verse 2 says, Son of man, take up a lamentation over Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now we know what a lamentation is because we just heard one. We just studied it. And it's not good. Take up a lamentation over the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and say to him, you compared yourself to a young lion of the nations. The lion of the nations is the envy, right? Everybody wants to be the lion. Nobody wants to be the sea monster, do they? Because the sea monster's ugly, right? Yet you are like the monster of the seas. No, so he says, I'm the lion. Everybody wants to be like me. God says, no, you're not. You're a monster. God had already said this to him in chapter 29, verse 3, okay? A point to be made here. This person had a severe problem of their self-perspective, didn't they? They had a skewed self-perspective. Me. Look at me. When in reality, God said, you are ugly, and we have an expression, ugly as sin. right? That's what it was. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 talks us about, or chapter 10 tells us that when we compare ourselves by ourselves, we are, do you remember what it says? Without understanding. People have a skewed perspective of themselves. Doesn't come from comparing themselves with what? This book, right? The mirror, right? I didn't look in the mirror and say, man, I'm great. No, I looked in the mirror and say, I'm an ugly monster, is what I am, right? What we, George and Janice and Marcy and I were talking about this the other night, how we consider ourselves in one way doesn't matter. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul said, I am conscious of nothing against myself, yet by this I am not acquitted. The one who examines me is the Lord. So what you think of yourself doesn't matter. What matters is what God thinks of us. And finally in chapter 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 11 says, if we judge ourselves rightly, we would not be judged by God, right? So there's a way to judge yourself. And there's the way to judge yourself rightly is by you open up this text, you look in the mirror and you say, am I doing it or not? Right? Comment or question, please interrupt me, stop me anytime. So, back here in Ezekiel 32, he says, you're like a monster. So the metaphor continues in verse 3. The Lord says, now I will spread my net over you. So you're a fish in the river. I'm going to spread my net over you. With a company of many peoples, I will leave you on the land. I will cast you on the open field. By the way, does a monster from the sea want to be on the land? Usually being on the land is where you want to be, but not if you're a fish. I will leave you on the land. I will cast you in the open field. I will cause all the birds of the heavens to dwell on you, and I will satisfy the beasts of the whole earth with you. And you remember the Nile rises every year, right? And it overfloods, and then when that Nile recedes, this is a yearly scene for them. They see the fish and the frogs and everything out there being picked apart by the crows. I will lay your flesh on the mountains. I will fill the valleys with your refuse. I will make the land drink the discharge of your blood. As far as the mountains, the ravines will be full of you. When I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken their skies. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. All the shining lights of the heavens I will darken over you, and will set the darkness on your land, declares the Lord. I will also trouble the hearts of many peoples when I bring your destruction among the nations into the lands which you have not known. I will make many peoples appalled at you, and their kings will be horribly afraid of you when I brandish my sword before them, and they will tremble at every moment, every man for his own life, on the day of your fall. For, thus says the Lord God, the sword of the king of Babylon will come upon you. So we're done with the metaphor, and now he says, all that destruction I've been talking about, that's going to be this king over here. You heard of him. Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, is coming, and he's going to destroy you. The result will be in verse 15. When I make the land of Egypt a desolation, and the land is destitute of that which filled it, when I smite all those who live in it, then they shall know that I am the Lord. Verse 16. This is a lamentation, they shall chant on it. So, they're going to destroy you. I'm coming, you're going to be a dead body lying in the field. You're a nation that everybody's looked up to, and now that you're dead. So this is a movie that you're watching. You're watching the fish monster being picked apart and eaten. The fish monster used to be loved by all the nations, and they see this fish monster now dead, and the scene closes with a lamentation. So now all the surrounding nations are looking at that and crying either for or against. The daughters of the nations shall chant it. Over Egypt and over all her hordes they shall chant it, declares the Lord God. So the curtain draws to a close. Act 2 begins in a different place. The dead go where? To Hades. Act 2 opens with the scene opening up, and now we're in Sheol, okay? There's a reunion is what's going on. Verse 19, go down. So, verse 17, in the 12th year, on the 15th of the month, I take this to be 15 days, or 12 days later. Is that right? Whatever, 14 days later. The same month, the first of the month. So, 14 days later, right? of the same month. I don't know that for sure, but I think it's the same month. Son of man, verse 18, wail for the hordes of Egypt. Bring it down, her and the daughters of the powerful nations, to the netherworld, to those who go down in the pit. Whom do you surpass in beauty? Go down and make your bed with the uncertain. Oh, you were great, but where are you now? You're where everybody goes. And look who's there, by the way. Verse 22, Assyria. They're there. They've already been destroyed. They're no longer a nation. Not a nation of significance. Verse 24, Elam is there with the uncircumcised. Verse 25, there's more uncircumcised. They're going down, down, down. Verse 26, Meshech and Tubal and the uncircumcised. They're there. There's this class reunion of all these nations that used to be great, but they're no longer great anymore. Verse 29, there's also Edom with its kings and its princes, who for all their might are laid with those slain by the sword. They tried their hardest, but guess where they all are? They're all dead. And by the way, what do all of these kings who once thought they were so great, what does every single one of them know without any ambiguity anymore about who's ruler? Every single one of them knows Jehovah God is ruler, and here comes Egypt, the freshman in the classroom, right? Verse 29, there's also Edom with the uncircumcised. Verse 30, they're also the chiefs of the north, they're the Sidonians and the uncircumcised. Over and over and over, there's these names of these countries that used to be so great. They're all gone. And now it's Egypt's turn. And in the picture, verse 31, these Pharaoh will see, and he will be comforted. Well, that's just a picture, because there's no comfort where he's going. Now, about the uncircumcised. Now remember, who is this message actually for? Is this message actually for Egypt? Not really. Who is it for? It's for God's people. And the uncircumcised generally indicate who? When it comes to God and his people, who are the uncircumcised? Everybody else? And in the picture, there's God's chosen people and everybody else, otherwise known as God's enemies. The point here over and over is, and I'll use this term, God's enemies go to hell. That's the picture, over and over. God's enemies, where are they? They're all right there in hell together. So, you don't want to be there, is the point. You don't want to be God's enemy. As far as the historicity of what would happen, the history after what happened, all this has been promised before. Egypt is going down, but now we're getting closer to 570. Now I mentioned the other day, in Sunday, I mentioned this Pharaoh Apri, who was Pharaoh when Jeremiah and all those people are thinking, well, Jeremiah wasn't thinking, he's saying, don't go to Egypt. They're all thinking, go to Egypt. Why? Because Pharaoh Apri is there, and he'll protect us. But I also mentioned that his right-hand man, Amasis, said, hey, no, I'll be king. And so there's civil war. Well, Amasis becomes king. He takes over the throne, and they keep Apri alive for a little while. But in 570, in 569, guess who shows up? Nebuchadnezzar. He shows up down there. The Zondervan Pictorial Encyclopedia of the Bible says, Hophra encouraged, so I was calling him Apri and a Hophra are the same. Hophra encouraged Zedekiah in his fatal new rebellion against Babylon in 589 and 588 BC. But when it came time for Zedekiah to call up Babylon and say, hey, Babylon, will you help? Remember? Egypt came out for a little while. Nebuchadnezzar dropped the siege. And God said, guess what? Hophra's going to lose. Nebuchadnezzar's going to come back. They're going to come back. In 525 BC, Cambyses of Persia took Egypt, just as Cyrus had done it earlier. In later Egypt, so around this time, in 525 BC, Egypt had a hankering for their lost independence. Get that? They had lost their independence. But they wanted their independence. So they have a bunch of revolts under Darius and Xerxes I. They achieved a precarious independence under the kings of the 28th and the 30th dynasties. But then along comes Artaxerxes III and totally squelches any rebellion. Later, in 332 BC, Alexander the Great will take it over from Persia. And then later, when Alexander the Great dies, the Ptolemies end up controlling, but still from Greece. Egypt then passed to Roman rule in 31 BC, where it remained until the Islamic conquest of AD 641. So for 1,000+ years, Egypt is no longer the nation it was. They had lost their independence. So God says, He says, hey, look, guess what? Egypt is going to go down. They're going to be brought down into Sheol. And then history unfolds, and God got it all right. Every single thing about it, God got it right. So, God is always right, isn't He? A couple lessons. Number one, God is always right. Number two, God always knows the future. God knows the future of any outcome. If you choose what's good, which is only one alternative of two, then He knows the outcome. It's going to go well for you. If you choose what's bad, which is the only other option, God knows it's not going to go well for you. So He knows this. And so when He speaks to you and says, listen to me, I know the future, I know what will happen, you've got to believe Him. He can point back here to Ezekiel 33. Look, I knew the thousands of years of history before. By the way, where is Egypt now? This Egypt that was back then. Where do we see it now? Do you see Egypt making headlines every day in the world news? No. Where is this Egypt that we read of? If you're going to go searching for this Egypt, what channel do you go to? What? The History Channel. That's where you go, right? You want to see the old Egypt with the great pyramids, the heyday of Egypt. You don't turn on modern news for that. You go to the History Channel. This is an illustration of what God said. They're going down. They're never going to come back up. Well, here we are years later. Comments or questions on anything I've been mentioning?
Egypt will know that I am the Lord.
Ooh, one of my favorites.
Yeah. And specifics. Because with a knowledge of the, when I was reading this, I was thinking back to, if you're an Egyptian in this situation, not only do you know that the Lord is the Lord, but you know that He's always been the Lord. As in it was God who saved Egypt through Joseph in the famine, and then God who saved Israel through Egypt in the Exodus. And all that they carried out with them, and just be able to look back at that and see, I'll use the word manipulation.
No, in a good way.
Yeah, that occurred throughout all that, and to be able to contrast that with the perspective that you had while you're alive. This sounds weird. This is the place of, I'm a dead Egyptian now. I'm the dead nation of Israel going, here I thought I was in control. Here I thought I was the one who had, who manipulated this myself, or conquered this, or changed this, and it never was.
Yep.
It never was. Every step of the way, they can recognize that God controlled that the whole time. It's an overwhelming thing to think about. Shame they wouldn't recognize it while they were still alive.
Right. And so what's the lesson?
Right.
Right? Not everything God says is good news, is it? You're going down. But it's dependent on what? With the individual, it's always dependent on whether or not you're being righteous. If you're being righteous, you've got good news coming. If you're being unrighteous, you have bad news coming, which is actually good news because it's justice. Who wants justice? Everybody alive wants justice. And the reason you know that is because you go up and punch them in the face. What do they want to do back? They want to punch you in the face back. They want justice, right? Everybody wants justice, right? George just mentioned, well, we'll get there in just a second. Point number 4 that I have is the exact relevance of God's Word in the world. I'm amazed by this. Now, it says in chapter 32, verse 2, you compared yourself to a young lion. Who does that? Who does that? I'm a lion. That's the word we're looking for. The prideful person. Who says, my Nile is mine, I have made it? The prideful person, right? Those are both talking about Pharaoh Apri. Now, Herodotus comes along some 200 years after this, and look at what he writes. It is said, been Apri's opinion that no one, not even a god, could cast him from his throne. So firmly did he think he was established. Can you not? Here's the point. This book is not written in a vacuum. It is written directly in this historical context. It's not another book, it's God's Word. But in one way, it's another book. Yes, Herodotus wrote this history book, which says the exact same thing this does, doesn't it? This book is not written in a vacuum. Here's another one. How many times do we read over and over about the nations, and they will know that I am the Lord? Because what are they wondering? They're wondering, who is the real God? Now, in some ways they don't really want to know, but that is the question everybody's been asking, right? Look at this. It is said that even Amasis, this same guy, Amasis is the one that, so Apri is the first pharaoh, and Amasis usurps him. So Amasis, it is said that even when Amasis was a private man, so before he became pharaoh, he was fond of drinking and joking, was not at all a sober man, and that when his drinking and pleasure-seeking cost him the bare necessities, he would go around stealing. Then, when he contradicted those who said he had their possessions, they would bring him to whatever place of divination was nearby. Sometimes the oracles declared him guilty, and sometimes they acquitted him. So literally, this happened all the time. Somebody, are you guilty or not? Bring him to the local priest, the false god. What does the local false god say? Local false god says you're guilty. If they didn't like the outcome, they'd go get another priest until they got enough priests where they finally couldn't ignore whatever those priests were saying, okay? So they're guilty, not guilty. Right on the spot is what they're doing. Listen. When he became king, he did not take the shrines of the gods who had acquitted him of theft, or give them anything for maintenance, or make it his practice to sacrifice there, for he knew them not to be worthless, and their oracles false. But he took scrupulous care of the gods who had declared his guilt, considering them to be gods in very deed, and their oracles infallible. What's he doing? He's running around testing the gods. Yeah, the gods who declared me innocent when I know I was guilty, I'm not going to pay any attention to them. Yeah, that's what we'd all do. But the greater picture here is they're running around trying to determine which gods are true and which gods are false. And God says, when I'm done with you, you'll know which is the true God. Again, the book is not written in a vacuum. It's got some cultural background. Comments or questions on this?
So we find our own gods that tell us, well, we're innocent.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's
right.
That's what we're doing now. That's what we've always done.
Right.
Gone around looking for the people that we claim to respect who will tell us what we want to be true.
That God would judge Egypt. Is God fair or unfair? It's fair. So if he's going to judge you, what does that imply about you? You must have some knowledge of something. Otherwise, it would be unfair, right? God judges them. So they knew something, all right? Now Egypt was especially privileged in their relationship with Israel, right? But Romans chapter 2 talks about the pagan, the Gentile, who, though he does not have the law, verse 14, they do not have the law, they do instinctively the things of the law. These not having the law are a law to themselves. They know what they should be doing, and so if God judges them, in some respect, they know, hey, guess what? I've messed up. Now, in Acts 17, The point is, there's something inherent in all of us that God will judge us against. And it includes, I'm not saying it's limited to this, but it includes at least, He made from one man every nation that they would seek God. So what about the dude in the Amazon who never sought God? Whose fault is that? His own. God, He put in at least this much. Find me. Now we know He put in more, but He put in at least that much. I asked this question. I guess we're going to bring this to an end because I've been going on for 54 minutes. The question I asked in the questions was, before we move on, consider how this passage, especially verses 7 and 8 and 11, might help refute the literalist's literal interpretation of other prophecies with similar language. Okay, so in Ezekiel 32, Egypt, that's verse 1 and 2. I'm going to beat you up with Nebuchadnezzar, that's verse 11. So the bookends here are Egypt and Nebuchadnezzar. No room for wondering what he's talking about there. I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to bring you down. I will cover the heavens and darken their skies. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light, and all the shining lights of heavens I will darken over you, and will set darkness on your land. Now, what does the dispensational premillennialist typically look for in this situation? Literal fulfillment. Dark skies. And so you point back here and you say, look, I don't know if it was dark or not. But we know that it was fulfilled in Babylon, right? John MacArthur, number 2, dispensational premillennialist. In chapter 7, when I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken their stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. All the shining lights in the heavens I will darken over you. What do you think dispensational premillennialist, literalist, John MacArthur says about the lights in verse 7 and 8? Anybody want to guess? What? This is likely a reference to Pharaoh, whose life and power is extinguished. Why even bother to pretend you're being consistent? Why put up? It's hogwash. It's garbage, right? The rest of the lights are the leaders and the people basking in His light, and they're plunged into darkness. This is the definite identification of the conqueror, as in 30:10, when Nebuchadnezzar is actually named. Yeah, there is no reference whatsoever in his book that chapter 32 refers to anything besides what Nebuchadnezzar did back then. He got it. He gets it this time. He even gets it that it's not literal, is it, right? So, comments or questions? I'm all done with chapter 32. I'm sure we've missed a lot. Do we know who is supposed to lead us in a song? I do not know.
I can lead a prayer, or somebody else can lead a song.
How about you do neither? Jonathan, can you lead us in prayer, please?